William "Billy" Connolly, CBE, is a Scottish comedian, musician, presenter and actor. He is sometimes known, especially in his native Scotland, by the nickname, the Big Yin. His first trade, in the early 1960s, was as a welder in the Glasgow shipyards, but he gave it up towards the end of the decade to pursue a career as a folk singer in the Humble Bums alongside friend Gerry Rafferty until 1971, and subsequently as a soloist. In the early 1970s, he made the transition from folk singer with a comedic persona to fully fledged comedian. Best known to many as a stand-up comedian, he appears in several lists of the greatest comedians ever. Connolly is also an actor and has appeared in such films as Water, Indecent Proposal, Pocahontas, Muppet Treasure Island, Mrs. Brown, The Boondock Saints, The Man Who Sued God, The Last Samurai, Timeline, Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties, Open Season, The X-Files, I Want to Believe, Open Season 2, Brave, Quartet and The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Connolly reprised his role as Noah Il Duce McManus in The Boondock Saints 2, All Saints' Day. Early life. Ancestry. Connolly's paternal grandfather, who, like his paternal grandmother, he never met, was an Irish immigrant who left Ireland when he was 10 years old. His great-great-great and great-great-grandfathers were from Connemara. Connolly's mother's family came from the west coast of Scotland. His maternal grandparents moved inland to Finnieston Street, Glasgow, in the early 1900s. His maternal great-great-great-grandfather, John O'Brien, fought at the Siege of Lucknow during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. He was wounded during the long siege by a severe gunshot to the left shoulder. He married a local 13-year-old Indian girl called Matilda. They had 4 children and settled in Bangalore after his military service. Childhood. Connolly was born at 69 Dover Street, on the linoleum, 3 floors up, at 6 o'clock in the evening, in Anderston, Glasgow, to William and Mary Connolly. This section of Dover Street, between Breadalbane and Claremont Streets, was demolished in the 1970s. Connolly refers to this in his 1983 song, I Wish I Was in Glasgow, with the lines, I would take you there and show you, but they pulled the building down, and they bulldozed it all to make a road. The flat had only 2 rooms, a kitchen living room, with a niche where the children slept, and another room for their parents. The family bathed in the kitchen sink and there was no hot water. In 1946, when he was barely 4 years old, Connolly's mother abandoned her children while their father was serving as an engineer in the Royal Air Force in Burma. I've never felt abandoned by her, Connolly explained in 2009. My mother was a teenager. My father was in Burma, fighting a bloody war. The Germans were dropping all kinds of crap on the town. We lived at the docks, so that's where all the bombs were happening. She was a teenager, with 2 kids, in a slum. A guy comes along and says, I love you. Come with me. Given the choice, I think I'd have gone with him. It looks as though it might all end next Wednesday, from where you're standing. I don't have an ounce of feelings that she abandoned me. She tried to survive. Connolly and his older sister, Florence, were cared for by 2 aunts, Margaret and Mona Connolly, his father's sisters, in their cramped tenement in Stuartville Street, Partick. My aunts constantly told me I was stupid, which still affects me today pretty badly. It's just a belief that I'm not quite as good as anyone else. It gets worse as you get older. I'm a happy man now, but I still have the scars of that. Regarding his sister, Connolly has called her his great defender. To this day, he explained in 2009, guys say, God, your sister. We didn't dare beat you up. Your sister was a nightmare. She used to get after them. In the mid-1960s, Flo was on holiday in Dunoon with her husband and 2 children. My mother said, I saw Florence walking along, and I followed her. I said, did you speak to her? Oh, no, I didn't, she said. I thought, oh, my God. It's like being a ghost while you're still alive, walking behind your own child. Having a look, I couldn't bear that. The aunts resented the children for the fact that they had to sacrifice their young lives to look after them. It was Mona who was troubled the most by having to care for her niece and nephew. It was very big of her to take on the responsibility, but, having said that, I wish people wouldn't do that. I wish people wouldn't be very big for 5 minutes and rotten for 20 years. Just keep your big, and keep your rotten, and get out of my life, because, quite frankly, I would rather have gone to a children's home and be with a lot of other kids being treated the same. To this day I'm still working on the things she did to me. Connolly credits one of John Bradshaw's publications with helping him deal with his past demons. He reckons that if this trauma happened to you when you were 5 or 6, then, emotionally, that part of you remains 5 or 6. And what you have to do is carry that 5 or 6-year-old around with you and try and emotionally help that other part of you. It sounds a bit airy-fairy, but I think he's something of a genius. Mr. Bradshaw, Connolly Sr. returned from the war, a stranger to his children. Shortly after the move to Partick, he never spoke to them about their mother's departure. Connolly's biography, Billy, written by wife Pamela Stevenson, documented years of physical and sexual abuse by his father, which began when he was 10 and lasted until he was about 15. Sometimes, when father hit me, I flew over the settee backwards, in a sitting position. It was fabulous. Just like real flying, except you didn't get a cup of tea or a safety belt or anything. In 1949, Mona gave birth to a child, Michael, by a local man. He was presented as a brother to Billy and Flo, and nobody questioned it. Connolly's bedroom had double windows, which directly faced St. Peter's Primary School across the street. Now defunct, it has been converted into living accommodation. The school was very violent indeed. At first, in the infant school, the nuns were very violent. And then over here they were just strapping you all the time. I had a psychopath in here, called MacDonald, Miss MacDonald. Big Rosie, they called her. There was a guy with glasses in my class and she called him Four Eyes. And she was a teacher. It was while at St. Peter's that Connolly decided he wanted to make people laugh. I can remember the moment in the school playground. I would have been 7 or 8, and I was sitting in a puddle and people were laughing. I had fallen in it and people found it funny. And it wasn't all that uncomfortable, so I stayed in it longer than I normally would, because I really enjoyed the laughing. My life was very unhappy at the time, and laughter wasn't something I heard all the time, so it was a joy. And I realized quickly that if you can have an audience this way, life was rather pleasant. While at St. Peter's, Connolly joined a gang. His arch-enemy was Geordie Sinclair, who lived around the corner. Connolly was a Cub Scout with the 141 pack. He revisits the site of one field trip, Auchengalan Scout Camp, during his world tour of Scotland. At age 12, Connolly decided he wanted to become a comedian but did not think that he fit the mold, feeling he needed to become more windswept and interesting. Also at that age, he joined an organization called the Children of Mary. The group would visit people and say the rosary, with a statue of the Lady of Lourdes in a shoebox. We were as welcome as hemorrhoids. The group would all kneel around the statue and pray. You could hear people hurrying prayers because there was a good television program coming. Around this time, Connolly went to Aberdeen with a few of his friends. I think there were polar bears running about. That's when I learned that Aberdeen is Gaelic for hypothermia. In the 1950s, Glasgow's sandstone tenements fell out of favour with the planners, which resulted in new houses being built on the fields and farmlands in the outskirts of the city. Between the ages of 14 and 20, Connolly was brought up on a now demolished council estate on Kinfauns Drive in the Drumchapel district of Glasgow, and would make the daily journey to St. Gerard's Secondary School in Govan, on the southern side of the River Clyde. He rode the bus to Partick, crossed the water by ferry and walked to 80 Vicarfield Street. Drumchapel is a housing estate just outside Glasgow. Well, it's in Glasgow, but just outside civilization, he has joked. To be quite honest, I quite liked it when I lived there. When I moved to Drumchapel, I was 14 and there was a bluebell wood there, and it was in great condition then. I don't think it's in quite so good condition now, but it was lovely then. We had rabbits and pheasants, and I really quite liked it. I just started to dislike it when I got older, into my teens and things. In my late teens, when I was stuck out there, it cost me a lot of money to go any place. It was a kind of cowboy town, but I liked that aspect of it, buying stuff out of vans. A ragman coming in a wee green van. Connolly revisited this tenement in Drumchapel during filming for the South Bank show in 1992. It eventually started to pour. This dreadful atmosphere came about the place. It's like Siberia, and once you're out here, there's no getting out of it. You have to buy your way out, or some kind of talent has to take you out, or you have to be very bright and move away to university. Also at 14, Connolly started to become interested in music, mainly Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry. At 15, he left school with 2 engineering qualifications, one collected by mistake which belonged to a boy named Connell. Connolly was a year too young to work in the shipyards. Instead, he started working for John Smith's bookshop on St. Vincent Street, delivering books on his bicycle. He also became a delivery van driver with Bilsland's Bakery until he was 16, when he was deemed overqualified to become an engineer. Instead, he worked as a boilermaker at Alexander Stephen and Sons shipyard in Linthouse. "What an extraordinary feeling," Connolly said, upon returning to the site of the now demolished shipyard in 1992. "I spent a great deal of my life in here, from age 16 to, well, I started at 15. I started my apprenticeship at 16 and finished when I was 21. Stayed till I was 22, and moved along. I finished welding when I was 24. When I came here, as an apprentice, there were 6 ships being built, right where I'm standing. It was an extraordinary place, a hive of activity. Welders, caulkers, platers, burners, joiners, engineers, electricians. I learned how men talk to one another, and how merciless Glasgow humour can be. It has made an indelible mark on me." His foreman was Sammy Boyd, but the 2 biggest influences on him were Jimmy Lucas and Bobby Dalgleish. Connolly also joined the Territorial Army Reserve Unit 15th Battalion, the Parachute Regiment. He later commemorated his experiences in the song, "Weekend Soldier."